Hi, my name's Gilbert Ambler. I'm a firearms attorney, and today we are back to talk about liability for churches that have security or safety teams, especially armed safety teams. Before we dive into this subject, however, if you have not yet hit that subscribe button, go ahead, hit that subscribe button, like, comment with your thoughts, and share with your friends. That way you and your friends both get this important Second Amendment related content. What I want to focus on is armed security or safety teams, as I like to call them in churches. We'll get into that distinction in just a minute. There's a consideration that you have to think about at the outset, however, which is, does the church I attend have a school, or am I in a state or jurisdiction where I can't carry in a church, period? We're going to proceed assuming no schools present and you're in a jurisdiction that would allow you to carry a firearm inside a church. If you're in such a jurisdiction and you want to be a part of your church's safety or security team, what should the church be thinking about in order to limit their liability and exposure? And I'll tell you early on in this video, one of the things that the church needs to think about is the size of their congregation, because the considerations are going to be hugely different from a large congregation with hundreds or thousands of people than a small congregation for 15 people. If you're part of a small congregation with 15 people, you know the people that regularly attend. If somebody stands up with a gun and is pulling the gun out to defend against an attacker in the church, everyone knows who the person pulling the gun is because they're one of 15 people who regularly attend the church. They know that person's not an additional bad guy. Think about how this could change in a large congregation. If you go to church with 1,000 other people, an attacker comes in and 6 people stand up and pull out guns, how are you to know who the good guys are and who the bad guys are? So that's a consideration, especially as congregations get larger, that churches need to think about managing. Another thing that a church should think about, and this is that distinction I was talking about earlier, and in some respects it is a distinction without a difference, is the terminology safety versus security team. What I find is that many people at churches like to call themselves security teams, and I urge them not to do this. I urge them not to do this even if they're not in a jurisdiction that requires licensing to operate as security. Many jurisdictions do require licensing to operate as a security officer, although typically that threshold gets triggered once there's payment involved. So if the church was compensating you for your services. Of course, if you're volunteering, you might not have to be licensed, but I hate the idea that if something happened, a prosecutor could play it up in front of a jury and say, you thought you were a security officer, weren't you? And you didn't even have the training to be a security officer. So how do we tone that down just a little bit? Call it a safety team. The safety team, they help get elderly people to their seats. They make sure there's not ice in the wintertime. And some members of the safety team might even carry firearms. If you are part of one of these teams, the church should also be thinking about de-escalation policies. My advice to people on these teams is, if there is somebody being disruptive but not violent, call the police and wait till the police arrive to take them out. Because if you approach them, there is risk that you're just going to escalate things further, and those people will not hesitate to file criminal charges or lawsuits against the people acting against them. So if you can wait for the police, let the police handle it. Be a good witness, be a good observer, be a good guardian to make sure that that person does not escalate things further. Other considerations for those larger churches: if they live stream their services, they ought to be posting signs saying that the live streams are on a delay, and they ought to actually delay the live streams. Why do we do this? Unfortunately, we know people intent on evil are often looking for a live audience. So you want to make sure that they are aware when they walk in the doors of the church that the streaming service is on a delay. So if they do something awful, it will not be live broadcast to the world. You also want to make sure that entrances and exits are limited, especially after the service starts. You don't want people coming in side doors or back doors where you wouldn't be able to keep an eye on them and get a good sense of who's coming in. You'd want one controlled point where members of the safety team could watch that entrance point and make sure that people are coming in just that door. And then finally, the church as a whole has some liability concerns, because the church should also be worried, could they get sued for what policies they do or don't have in place? One thing that the church might want to think about here is, if they want a safety team, they might want to get advice from an attorney on how to best implement that safety team. Essentially, they might want a safety evaluation conducted by an attorney. Why would they want it done by an attorney? Well, there would at least be an argument available that if it was done by an attorney, that attorney-client privilege applies, and therefore, if they got sued, hopefully it would be protected, and the opposing side, the side suing them, wouldn't be able to say, oh, you should have done this, or you should have done this, or your safety evaluation told you to do this, and you failed to do it here. So if it comes from the attorney, hopefully we don't get into that whole argument. If you enjoyed this content, if you've got questions about this comment, leave your questions below. Otherwise, give us a subscribe. Until next time.